Hi, my name is Dr. Josh Anderson, and it is a pleasure and opportunity to be able to share about overcoming anger. I don't know about you, but I had some really cool experiences growing up, and some of those experiences were like family get-togethers. And whenever we had a family get-together, there was always grilling or some sort of bonfire or something like that. Somehow, some ways, fire was involved, right? And I was always oddly just enthralled by the idea of how to build a fire before you grill. We had those charcoal grills, and my grandpa was usually fiddling with it, and so I would always watch him doing that. And as he was doing it, invariably what he would do is he would add a little lighter fluid to the fire. And as a kid, I always thought that was the most incredible thing in the world, right? Seeing this small little fire go with the charcoal, and then all of a sudden some lighter fluid was added, and it just blew up, right? And that was cool. But then as an adult, as I started, doing my own charcoal fires or grilling, or as I was building fires while we were camping or something like that, adding that lighter fluid, I realized a little bit about how out of control lighter fluid could get if you didn't take care of it well, right? And that's a little bit like what anger is. It's this emotion that comes about when you're displeased with a situation, right? You are in a situation where you're in conflict with a coworker, or you're in conflict with somebody that, with a family member, or whatever the situation is. It might be a situation, it might be a person, but there is this displeasing. But then there is this fuel that is added to the fire, and that's a little bit like what anger is. And the problem with anger is that you want to control a situation. How many times my kids, I want to control them, but they're getting out of control. And I start welling up with this emotion of anger. And the problem with trying to control something is that when you add anger to it, it actually gets out of control. This is what Proverbs says in Proverbs 15:18. It says, "A hot-tempered man stirs up strife." When you hear that, you think about that lighter fluid that's added to a conflict, or added to a situation, or added to this relationship that you have. And you realize that this anger is doing no good in this particular situation. And you realize that if you continue to add that fuel to the fire, it's only going to get worse. I had a dad who, when I grew up, he had some anger issues. And I remember often that when there was a conflict at school, or there was a conflict with one of our coaches, he would add fuel to that fire because of his anger issue. And if I'm transparent enough, I also realize that at times I've done that in my own life. So how do we overcome that anger? How do we take a situation, take a conflict that we may not necessarily agree with, or we might be displeased with, and we try to solve the issue as opposed to adding fuel to the fire? Well, Scripture says in Ephesians 4, verse 26, "Be angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your anger." What does this passage say? It doesn't give us necessarily the tools, but it does give us a principle. And that is that anger, like any other emotion, is an emotion that we can have. And oftentimes, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be angry about something, but it's what we do with that anger. So here's some tips, maybe here are some tools that we can use so that we can overcome anger in our situation, in our life circumstances. Number one, we need to figure out the source of why we are angry. When I get up in the morning and I realize that I'm getting frustrated with my kids, what is the reason why I am frustrated? Is it something that they're doing? Is it something that I had to deal with yesterday but I didn't deal with, and so now it's overflowing in their life? You see, we need to understand the source of what's going on in our life so that we understand why we are feeling that anger. Because anger, many times, is like that check engine light. We don't necessarily know what's going on in our engine, but we do realize that there's an issue that we need to deal with. So we need to understand this, the source. The second thing is that we need to submit it to God. Before doing anything, before trying to control the situation and getting our anger more agitated, we need to realize that we sometimes don't have control over a situation, but we do know who does, and that is God. So we submit it to God and say, God, here's the situation, here's the issue that I'm dealing with, and help me to navigate this well in a way that is pleasing to you. And if you are overcome with anger often, maybe that's a time for you to say, God, I know my default position is to get angry about this, but I don't want to. So would you take my anger and would you make good from it? So we find out what the source is, we submit it to God, and then this is what we do. We solve the issue, we don't deal with the people, okay? This was something that a mentor of mine said a couple years ago, and it actually transformed the way I dealt with conflict. Because a lot of times I look at the people who are bringing conflict into my life. It might be my boss, it might be a family member, it might be that person on the road that is frustrating me while I'm driving, right? Whoever it is, I realize that there is an issue to deal with. But many times what I do is I direct my anger toward that person instead of addressing and solving that issue. So instead of trying to deal with that person, try to solve the issue. So we identify the source, we submit it to God, we solve the issue, and then there's another tool that I think is a really helpful tool too, and that is this. Sometimes we need to step away. It doesn't matter what we're going through. It doesn't matter what issue that we're dealing with, but we realize that if we continue to go and try to address it right now, right here, it's only going to get worse. Our anger is only going to get more agitated, and it's that lighter fluid that is going to take the fire that we're dealing with up to an astronomical level, and it's not going to be good, right? So maybe times we need to step away, calm down a little bit, and then readdress the issue. And then lastly, I realize that this talk is not going to solve everyone's anger issues or be able to address or deal with everybody who around us who have anger issues. But sometimes maybe we need to find support. And so we need to understand what the source is, submit it to God, be able to solve the issue and not deal with the person. But there are also times when we might need to get support with those around us. That's why churches have things like Celebrate Recovery. That's why we have different support groups. We have different ministries that can help us. Maybe it's counseling that you need to go to. You realize that this is something that you can't solve on your own. And so maybe you need help. That is why God gave us people around us. Some of them are just friends. Some of them are professionals out there that can help us navigate these nuances of life so that we can overcome anger. And isn't that the goal? The goal is to be able to solve life's issues with the support that God has given us so that we can walk in a way that honors Him and pleases Him. And that's how we overcome anger.